Where, where, where did this happen?
This just happened right in the middle of the road. I can't call nobody.
Were you walking or were you in a car?
I was walking that way.
With your baby?
No, he was supposed to be in the car.
He went that way.
What'd you see happen?
I was behind them at the red light. She jumped out the truck. When she jumped out the truck, his car door opened. I'm thinking he finna jump out. But then next thing you know, I seen a baby down there. He ran over the baby and took off.
Out in the street?
Right here at the red light.
So she and the baby were in the vehicle that hit the baby?
Yeah, she and the baby in the vehicle, but she got out first and went across the street and he sat the baby on the ground and just ran over the baby.
His name was Pablo Golden. He was 8 months old. He had not yet learned to walk. He had not yet spoken his first word. He had never seen a sunrise on his own terms, never felt rain on his face, never had the chance to laugh until his belly hurt. 8 months. That is all the time the world gave him. On a Tuesday morning in Jacksonville, Florida, Pablo Golden was placed on the ground next to a moving vehicle by the one person who was supposed to protect him above all others, his father. And then the car moved forward. What followed was not an accident born of distraction or fate. It was a collision between rage and innocence lost. The intersection of Lenox Avenue and McDuff Avenue in Jacksonville sees hundreds of cars pass through every single day. Families going to work, children heading to school, strangers running errands. On that particular morning, that ordinary intersection became a crime scene. It became the last place Pablo Golden ever breathed. And the man who put him there was crying before the handcuffs were even on his wrists. This is the story of what happened. This is the story of who Pablo was. And this is the story of the questions that linger long after the sentence was handed down. Mornings in Jacksonville can feel deceptively peaceful. The Florida heat has not yet fully arrived. The streets are still waking up. Families move through kitchens, pouring coffee, checking phones, tending to babies. For a young couple and their 8-month-old son, that Tuesday started like any other morning. Pablo Golden was 8 months old, and at that age, babies are everything at once. They are exhausting and joyful and demanding and miraculous. They need feeding every few hours. They go through diapers faster than any new parent expects. They cry when they are uncomfortable, when they are hungry, when they simply want to be held. Pablo would have woken up that morning the way babies do, fully, completely, without apology. Justin Golden was 20 years old. By all accounts, he was a young man still figuring out what fatherhood meant. The relationship between Justin and Pablo's mother had already developed fractures. There were tensions beneath the surface. There were patterns of behavior that had made the household difficult and at times dangerous. But that morning, to anyone looking in from the outside, it might have appeared like an ordinary family running an ordinary errand. The car was loaded. The baby was with them. They were out on the road together. No one could have known that within a short window of time, everything would change. No one could have known that a disagreement about something as simple as baby supplies would detonate into catastrophe. No one except perhaps the people who had already seen what this man was capable of when he lost control. The morning was still normal, but the fuse had already been lit. Every tragedy has a hinge point, a moment where one choice made differently changes everything that follows. In some cases, that moment is dramatic. In others, it is shockingly mundane. The argument that broke out between Justin Golden and Pablo's mother that morning was about diapers and baby wipes. Let that settle for a moment. Not money, not infidelity, not a betrayal of any grand magnitude. Diapers, baby wipes, the kind of argument that thousands of young couples have every single week without anyone getting hurt. But for Justin Golden that morning, it was enough. It was enough to send him somewhere dark. Pablo's mother, a young woman who had already lived inside the turbulence of this relationship, knew when things were escalating. She had learned to read the signs. And what she was seeing in that car in Justin's face and the way his voice was changing told her that she needed to create distance. She stepped out of the vehicle. She physically removed herself from the situation. This was not cowardice. This was survival. This was a woman who had learned through painful experience that when Justin reached a certain point, the safest thing she could do was not be within arm's reach. She stepped out. She stood at the intersection. She waited for the moment to pass. But Pablo could not step out. Pablo was 8 months old. Pablo was strapped in. Pablo was entirely dependent on the adults around him to make the right decision. And that is where the first wrong decision was made, not when Justin finally snapped. The first wrong decision was made in all the moments that had led to this. Every unaddressed pattern of anger. Every moment of domestic violence that had gone without consequence. Every time the cycle completed itself and began again. By the time they were sitting at that intersection on Lenox and McDuff, the chain of decisions had already been running for a long time. And the next link in that chain was about to close. What happened next took seconds. Seconds. There is no drawn-out sequence here. There is no elaborate plan. There is just a man, a car, and a baby who deserve better. Justin Golden took Pablo out of the vehicle. He placed his 8-month-old son on the pavement, on the ground, at an active intersection, next to the car. A witness at the scene saw what happened. She described watching the man set the baby down on the ground right beside the vehicle. She said there was no hesitation. There was no moment of second thoughts. He put the baby down. He got back in the car. He drove forward. The car ran over Pablo Golden. Pablo Golden, who weighed perhaps 18 or 19 pounds. Pablo Golden, who could not roll away. Who could not call for help. Who did not understand what was happening. The witness screamed. Other people at the intersection heard it. The sound that follows what she saw does not need to be described in detail. What happened to Pablo Golden's body does not need to be cataloged here with clinical precision. What matters is that he was a baby. What matters is that he was alive. And what matters is that within seconds of being placed on that pavement, Pablo Golden's injuries were unsurvivable. Justin Golden drove away from the intersection. He did not stop. He did not look back. He left his son on the road. The intersection erupted. People who had witnessed what happened were already in motion before the dust settled. Calls were flooding into 911. Someone had run toward Pablo. The scene was chaotic and terrifying. First responders received reports of a man running over a baby at the intersection of Lenox Avenue and McDuff Avenue. When police and emergency medical personnel arrived, what they found confirmed the worst. There was a pacifier on the ground. There was blood on the road. And there was Pablo Golden critically injured, still breathing but barely. Emergency responders worked on him immediately. He was transported to a hospital as fast as the system could move. Doctors at the hospital received a child with severe traumatic brain injuries. The damage to Pablo's skull and brain was catastrophic. Doctors would later describe the injuries using specific medical terms. What those terms mean in plain language is this. Pablo's brain had been damaged beyond repair. Pablo Golden died at the hospital. He was 8 months old. While paramedics were working on his son, Justin Golden was driving. He had left the scene of what he had done, and he was trying to put distance between himself and that intersection. But he did not get far. The people who had witnessed what happened at that corner were not willing to let him disappear. Multiple witnesses followed Justin's vehicle. They stayed on the phone with dispatchers. They tracked the direction he was traveling, and they did not lose him. Justin Golden pulled into a nearby gas station. He may have thought that stopping somewhere public would protect him. He may have believed that if he just stayed calm, if he looked like someone who had just been filling up his tank, the situation might resolve itself. It did not. Police arrived at the gas station and took Justin Golden into custody. He offered no violent resistance. He was placed in handcuffs. He was put into a police vehicle, and he was taken to the Duval County Jail to be questioned. The pacifier was still on the road at Lenox and McDuff, and Pablo was gone. The interrogation room is a particular kind of space. It is designed to feel removed from the outside world. The walls are plain. The lighting is flat. There is a table and a chair and a camera running in the corner. Everything you say is recorded. Everything you do is being watched. Detectives who work homicide cases develop a specific set of skills for these rooms. They know when to speak and when to let silence do the work. They know how to ask a question that sounds simple and is actually not simple at all. And they know that the moment a suspect walks through that door, the real interview has already begun. Justin Golden was 20 years old when he sat down across from investigators. He was not stone-faced. He was not defiant. He was crying. The crying began almost immediately, before questions were fully asked, before the weight of the situation had fully been stated for the record. He was crying. Investigators are trained not to read emotion at face value. Crying does not equal remorse. Crying does not equal innocence. Crying does not equal guilt. It is simply data. What matters is what the person says while they are crying. What matters is whether the facts they offer hold together. What matters is whether the story they tell can be verified. Justin Golden's first statement to investigators was that he had not meant to hurt Pablo. He said he loved his son. He said it was not intentional. He said the argument had pushed him past a breaking point. Investigators listened. They asked questions. They asked about the intersection. They asked about what happened before the car moved. They asked him to walk them through the sequence of events step by step. And as Justin talked, certain things began to emerge from the account that could not be easily explained away. Investigators noted the details. They noted what Justin chose to say. They noted what Justin chose not to say. And they noted the moments where the story he was telling did not quite fit the account given by a woman who had been standing at that same intersection when it happened. The interrogation lasted through multiple rounds of questioning. The cameras kept rolling, and every frame of that footage would later become critical. In the interrogation room, Justin Golden made admissions. But admissions have layers. There is what a person confesses to. There is what they frame as an accident. There is what they try to bury under emotion. Justin Golden acknowledged that he had placed Pablo on the ground. He acknowledged that he had gotten back into the car. He acknowledged that the car had moved. But in his telling, the version of events carried a specific framing. He described himself as overwhelmed. He described the argument as the catalyst. The disagreement about diapers and baby wipes had escalated to a point where, in his words, he could not control what he was doing. He said he placed Pablo on the ground because he did not want to be responsible for the baby in that moment. He said Pablo's mother had threatened to call police on him during the argument. That threat, he implied, had contributed to his state of mind. He said he put Pablo down so that he could leave. He said he did not intend for the car to strike his son. He said he loved Pablo. He said it multiple times. What Justin Golden did not fully address in those early hours of interrogation was the physics of what had happened. He did not explain how, if he was simply trying to drive away, the vehicle moved in the specific direction that it did. He did not explain what a person does or does not see when they are seated behind the wheel of a car and an 8-month-old child is on the pavement directly beside that vehicle. He did not offer an explanation for why, after hearing or feeling what happened, he did not stop. He did not explain the decision to keep driving. Pablo's mother gave her own account to investigators. She described a relationship marked by domestic violence. She described a pattern of behavior. She said that Justin had been volatile before. She said that on the day Pablo died, she had exited the vehicle specifically to avoid the escalation she could see building. She heard the screaming from the people on the street before she saw what had happened. And when she understood what had been done in the seconds that followed, she described a kind of disbelief that does not have a clean word in the English language. The investigators now had two accounts. They had a grieving mother. They had a crying father. They had a dead child. And they had a gas station's worth of time between the crime scene and the arrest to account for. The evidence would have to do the rest of the talking. Modern criminal investigations run on evidence, not emotion, not first impressions, evidence. And in a case that had taken place at a busy intersection in the middle of a Tuesday morning, there was going to be a great deal of it. Security cameras were a priority. Jacksonville, like most major American cities, has a substantial network of surveillance cameras. Traffic cameras, business cameras, dashboard cameras from vehicles that happened to be nearby. Investigators began pulling footage from every available angle of the intersection of Lenox and McDuff. What those cameras captured told a story that did not require interpretation. The footage showed the sequence of events as they unfolded. It showed the argument. It showed Pablo's mother stepping out of the vehicle. It showed Justin Golden at the wheel. It showed Pablo being removed from the vehicle and placed on the ground. It showed the car moving. It showed what happened next. Camera footage does not cry. Camera footage does not offer explanations about being overwhelmed or loving its children. Camera footage simply records. And what the cameras recorded at that intersection on that morning was a sequence of deliberate actions. The forensic examination of Pablo's injuries was also critical to the investigation. Medical examiners documented the nature and extent of the trauma. The injuries were consistent with a child being struck by a vehicle. The injuries to Pablo's skull and brain were catastrophic. The medical examiner's findings confirmed what the cameras had shown. This was not a child who had fallen. This was not an accident of the kind that can happen in a parking lot when a parent is not watching. This was a child who had been placed in the path of a vehicle. Investigators also conducted canvassing interviews with witnesses at the scene. Multiple people had seen what happened. Multiple people had followed Justin's vehicle to the gas station. Their accounts were consistent with each other. Their accounts were consistent with the camera footage. Their accounts were not consistent with the version Justin Golden had offered in the interrogation room. There was also the physical evidence recovered at the scene itself. The pacifier, the bloodstains on the pavement. Each piece was photographed, documented, and entered into the chain of evidence. As the picture came together, the charge that investigators were building toward came into focus. This was not going to be prosecuted as a traffic accident. This was not going to be filed as a tragic misunderstanding. The evidence pointed towards something far more deliberate, and the charges that followed reflected that conclusion. Justin Golden was charged with 2 serious criminal counts. The first charge was manslaughter of a child. Under Florida law, this charge applies when a person without intent to cause death kills a child through negligent or culpable behavior. Culpable negligence in Florida means more than just carelessness. It means reckless conduct that shows a disregard for human life. It means doing something that a reasonable person would recognize as dangerous and doing it anyway. Placing an 8-month-old child on the pavement of an active intersection next to a running vehicle and then getting behind the wheel qualifies. The second charge was vehicular homicide. Vehicular homicide means killing a human being through the negligent operation of a motor vehicle. In Florida, this can be charged as a felony of the first or second degree, depending on the circumstances. In Pablo's case, the circumstances were clear. A child died as a result of being struck by a vehicle operated by Justin Golden. Together, these two charges represented the legal framework the state of Florida used to hold Justin Golden accountable for what he had done to his son. Justin Golden entered a guilty plea. He did not take his case to trial. He stood before a court and admitted to what he had done. The judge presiding over the case reviewed the circumstances of Pablo's death. The judge considered the evidence. The judge considered the plea. And the judge sentenced Justin Golden to 30 years in Florida State Prison. 30 years. Justin Golden was 20 years old when he was sentenced. He will be 50 years old when he becomes eligible to consider release. 30 years is a long time to sit with what you did to an 8-month-old boy. 30 years is a long time to remember a Tuesday morning at an intersection in Jacksonville. The gavel came down, and that was the end of Justin Golden's life as a free man for a very long time. But a sentence, no matter how many years it carries, cannot answer everything. It cannot explain what happens inside a person to make them capable of what Justin Golden did. That question belongs to a different kind of examination. The interrogation room footage of Justin Golden is difficult to watch. That difficulty is intentional in a way. His distress appears genuine in the sense that the tears are real and the emotional state is undeniably agitated. But genuine distress and genuine remorse are not the same thing. And understanding the difference is critical to understanding what happened at that intersection. Behavioral analysts and forensic psychologists who study recorded interrogations look for specific patterns. They look at what a person volunteers versus what they reveal only when pressed. They look at how a person frames the actions they are acknowledging. They look at whether the emotion tracks with the content of what is being said or whether it seems to exist independently of it. What emerges from a careful reading of Justin Golden's behavior in that room is a portrait of a young man in crisis, but not necessarily in the way he was presenting himself. He framed the event in terms of what was done to him before it happened. The argument, the threat to call police, the overwhelming emotion. This is a pattern that psychologists refer to as an externalizing attribution. It means locating the cause of one's behavior outside of oneself. It means saying in essence that other forces were responsible for what I did. This is a common human coping mechanism. When we feel shame or guilt or fear, we look for explanations that reduce our sense of personal responsibility. But there is a point at which externalizing attribution stops being a coping mechanism and becomes something more troubling. In Justin Golden's account, the argument was the reason he placed his son on the ground. The threat to call police was a reason he needed to leave. The overwhelming emotion was a reason he lost control of what he was doing. Each of these elements shifted the locus of causation away from Justin and onto something else. What this framing cannot account for is the sequence of deliberate actions that the camera recorded. An argument does not make a person remove a child from a vehicle and place that child on the pavement of a public road. There is no biological or psychological mechanism by which being threatened produces that specific behavior as an automatic output. Between the argument and the moment Pablo was placed on the ground, there were decisions. Each one was made by Justin Golden. The absence of planning does not mean the absence of agency. There is also the question of what happened after the vehicle moved. In many cases where a person causes harm and is genuinely overwhelmed by shock, the instinct is to stop, to get out, to go back. Justin Golden did not stop. He drove away from what he had done. He drove to a gas station. He sat in that car while people who had witnessed what he had done followed him and called police. That interval between leaving the scene and being taken into custody is one of the most psychologically revealing segments of the entire case. It was not the interval of a man who had just realized in horror what he had accidentally done. It was the interval of a man who was trying to decide what came next. The tears in the interrogation room were real. The love he described feeling for Pablo may well have been real in some form. But love in this case was not enough. Love that cannot withstand a disagreement about baby wipes and express itself as protection rather than violence is not the kind of love that keeps a child safe. The camera captured something that day that no amount of tears in an interrogation room could erase. It captured choice. His name was Pablo Golden. He was 8 months old. This section does not belong to the investigation. It does not belong to the lawyers or the cameras or the psychology. This section belongs to him. 8 months is long enough to become a person. 8 months is long enough to develop preferences, a favorite person to be held by, A way of laughing that is entirely your own. A look of pure concentration when something new catches your attention. At 8 months old, babies are learning that objects exist even when they cannot be seen. They are learning cause and effect. They are starting to understand that when they reach for something, they can sometimes grab it. They are learning their own name. Pablo Golden was somewhere in that beautiful window of becoming when he died. He did not have a story yet. That is the most painful part of a death at this age. Not just that a life was cut short, but that the life had not yet had the chance to reveal itself. We do not know what Pablo Golden would have loved. We do not know if he would have been drawn to music or to building things or to the outdoors. We do not know what his voice would have sounded like at 10 years old, or what he would have laughed about, or what would have made him feel proud. We do not know what kind of man he would have become. We do not know who he would have loved. Pablo's mother carried him. She held him through nights when babies simply cannot settle. She fed him and bathed him and watched him sleep. She was the person he knew best in the world at 8 months old. And she was the person who stood at that intersection and heard the screaming of strangers before she understood what they were screaming about. No parent should ever have to understand something like that. Pablo Golden was a baby. He had done nothing. He had asked for nothing beyond what every baby asks for: safety, warmth, the basic assurance that the adults around him would keep him from harm. He deserved that. He deserved decades of ordinary life. He deserved to grow up and make mistakes and learn from them. He deserved everything that a Tuesday morning in Jacksonville took from him. Pablo Golden, 8 months old. Remember his name. There are cases in true crime that feel like aberrations. Cases that are so extreme and so unusual that it is easy to set them aside as something that exists outside of ordinary life. This is not one of those cases. The factors that converged on that intersection in Jacksonville are not rare. They are not exotic. They are, in fact, painfully common. Domestic violence is not a niche issue. It is not a problem that exists only in certain kinds of households. The Centers for Disease Control estimates that roughly 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence in their lifetimes. In households where domestic violence is present, children are affected, even when they are not the direct targets, even when they are only 8 months old. Pablo's mother had described a history of violence in her relationship with Justin Golden before this case ever reached a courtroom. She had knowledge of who this person was and what he was capable of. She had made the decision to step out of that vehicle because she understood the risk to herself. But she had not had time to protect Pablo. This is one of the most important things to sit with. Domestic violence does not only endanger the direct target, it endangers children. It endangers the people least able to protect themselves. The second lesson from this case is about anger. Not anger as a character flaw, not anger as a sign of evil, but anger is something that, when unaddressed and unmanaged, can escalate to catastrophic endpoints. Justin Golden was 20 years old. He was a young man with significant anger management deficits. He had, by the account of Pablo's mother, a history of violence. The systems that exist around young men like Justin Golden, whether they are family, community, mental health resources, or accountability structures, had not intervened in a way that changed the outcome. This is a systemic failure, not only an individual one. That framing is not an excuse. Justin Golden made his choices. He bears full responsibility for what he did. But if we only ever look at the individual and never at the conditions that produce the individual, we will keep losing children to these exact circumstances. The third lesson is about the fragility of what we call the safety net. Pablo was in the care of his parents. He was supposed to be safe. There was no indication in the hours before that Tuesday morning that the day would end the way it did. This is the nature of these tragedies. They do not announce themselves. They do not give clean warning signs that a stranger could read from the outside. But Pablo's mother had lived inside the warning signs. She had felt them. If you are in a relationship where anger escalates in ways that frighten you, the risk does not only belong to you. It belongs to anyone in that car with you, anyone who cannot get out on their own. The resources exist. The National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached at 1-800-7997-233. It operates around the clock. It does not judge. It helps people understand their options and find their way to safer ground. Pablo Golden deserves safer ground, and there are children right now in cities across this country who deserve it too. A Tuesday morning, an intersection, a pacifier on the ground, and 30 years of silence ahead of the man who put it there. Justin Golden will spend the better part of his adult life inside a Florida state prison. He will have time, more time than most people ever have, to sit still and think. He will have time to replay what happened at the intersection of Lenox and McDuff. He will have time to hear, in whatever way memory works, the sounds that followed what he did. He will have time to think about the word father, about what it means, about what it was supposed to mean. The camera at that intersection recorded everything. The interrogation room camera recorded everything too. And the questions those recordings leave behind are not simple. They are not comfortable. They are the questions that true crime asks at its best, not to satisfy morbid curiosity, but to force us to look at something we would prefer to look away from. What does it take to reach the point where a human being places a baby on a road? What goes unaddressed, unchecked, unsupported in the years and months and days that lead to that moment? And what do we owe as a society to the children who are counting on us to ask those questions before the Tuesday morning arrives? Pablo Golden lived for 8 months. He was loved by his mother. He had a name. He had a face. He had a life that was his, and he deserved every year of it. The intersection of Lenox and McDuff is ordinary now. Cars pass through it every day. People run errands. Families head to work. Most of them have no idea what happened there. But Pablo was there, and now you know. If this story moved you, please share it. Not because true crime needs more viewers, but because somewhere out there, there is a child who needs someone to notice, to ask, to act. And perhaps that someone is you. Pablo Golden, 8 months old, forever.